Hello students, today our discussion will be on 7th July, London bombing in 2005 and its impact in Britain. But our focus will be the representation of Muslims in the British media. To give an overview of Muslims in Britain, let me tell you that Britain had contact with the Muslim world since the 7th century through trade, contacts with Egypt and Palestine, which was under the Muslim rule. Then later on, Britain, through its trade, was in contact with the Muslims in Spain and Portugal, and that is the Muslims in Andalusia. Then records indicate the presence of Arab Muslims in London from the 12th or 13th centuries, presumably for trade purposes. From the 16th century to the end of the 18th century, British relations with the Muslims were cordial. Britain set a protectorate in Egypt in the late 19th century. During the Ottoman period, Britain was in contact with the Ottoman emperor, and particularly it started through Britain. Through trade. So it's just that the Muslims were not a new group of people in Great Britain. They were known to the Britishers or the English people for a long time. So in the 19th century and in the early 20th century, when Britain was colonizing Muslim territories, of course, through their colonization, they came to know about the Muslims. People in the late 19th century and early 20th century. So, for example, Muslims from Yemen and Somalia, they arrived in Cardiff and London in Britain, and most of them were sailors. Again, as I have always discussed on the topic of immigration or immigration history in the Western world or in the developed world, is that immigration has always been a two-way process, two-way street, where the immigrants go to their host country for a better life, and the host country, they embraces or they welcome the immigrants to utilize their skill to make their society to bring about the economic development of the country, to build their infrastructure, and in that with that regard, the Somali and the Yemeni people arrived in Britain. So as the Muslim population started settling in Britain, they also started establishing or building their mosque, their place of worship. So in Liverpool, there was this Muslim convert, as they are known as the revert, Abdullah Henry William Culam. He converted to Islam in Morocco, and he educated himself as an alim, an Islamic scholar, and later on he established a mosque in Liverpool in Britain. When we will discuss about the Muslim representation in the British media, we will I guess we will see how they are represented or if they are at all stereotyped. But the point I want to make is that Muslims in Britain were not new people. They have had contact with Britain since the 7th century. So after during in the 1940s, some South Asian Muslims from the Indian subcontinent, India, Pakistan, and which is the current India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, they purchased. They settled in Britain, in London, and they purchased 3 houses in London's East End and converted those houses into mosque, East London Mosque, and the current Islamic Cultural Center. So the again there were people, some politicians. Sometimes they also funded the Muslims in Britain to build their mosque. So some Muslims petitioned to the British government to build a mosque in London. So during a war cabinet meeting in 1940, Sir Winston Churchill allocated funds to build the Regent's Park Mosque in London, which was opened in 1944 in the presence of King George the Sixth. So as we can see that the people, Muslims, were known people in the British society. But later on, after the World War II, there was this influx of colored people, as they were known as the time, or they were termed as that time. They migrated to Britain, and most of them, particularly from South Asia, they worked as laborers in the textiles. England needed skilled laborers to work in the textile. And sometimes, as I have mentioned in my other classes, when the white labor force or the Britishers or the English people, the mainstream English people, they were reluctant to work in the industries, in the textile factories, or to do any hard job that involves hard labor. So they did not do the job, and that's why to fill up that vacuum, Britain needed labor from other countries, and that's how many South Asians moved to the United Kingdom. But with the influx of the colored people or the Asian immigrants, Britain started hearing the rhetoric from the politicians. There was this politician who would, Enoch Powell was a conservative politician, and his name was Enoch Powell, and he was critical of the influx of Asian immigrants to England, and he had the racist rhetoric against them. So as the government needed labor, and they had people in Britain, but then again there was this development of this racist political parties who would be very divisive and unaccepting of the colored immigrant. Colored is the term that was officially called for people, the non-white people. So for this, for the topic I am discussing today, it's about British Muslims, and this is based on my research. I have written a book, and it's published by the UK publisher, the Edinburgh University Press, in 2010, and the name of the book is Young British Muslims: Identity, Culture, Politics, and the Media. It's available in the Aisha the library, and I have also provided you the media chapter from this book for your reading for this class. So as I said, that there was the development of this divisive political parties with the influx of the immigrants, and so when I interviewed young people, I conducted this project in England, an understanding of the identity of young British Muslims in 2008. I visited 5 cities to conduct interviews: London, Leicester, Bradford, Leeds, and Cardiff. So it was the interview. The book is based on the interview of 216 participants, mostly young people, 15 to 18 years. So while they discussed their identity, a lot of social issues emerged that they faced while growing up in Britain. Most of them were British born, but then again on the basis of their color, on the basis of their Muslim name, on the basis of their visibility, say Muslim women's scarf, burqa, niqab, men's jilbab, or the topi or the cap, men's pajama, Punjabi or shalwar kurta, they looked visible, and that's how sometimes they were vilified in public places. The media, they are vilified in the media through stereotypes, and some the conservative politicians will finger point at the Muslims, and just singling out them and viewing them as the other. So in the interviews, as there were discussions on the othering of Muslims by a section of the British society, but then again there were also some positive comments, like Archbishop of England in 2008, Dr. Rowan William, he spoke for the Muslims. He said that he spoke about the Muslim family law. He said that the British law should, family law should also accommodate the Muslim Sharia law, that is for the Muslim family law. So he said that the Jewish people, they have their Beit Din, they have their Jewish family law incorporated with the British law, and so the Muslims family law should also be incorporated with the British law. But my participants spoke very highly of Dr. Rowan William, the Archbishop of Britain. So he was Archbishop of Canterbury, and so he was viewed positively because he was speaking for the Muslims at a time when Muslims sometimes felt marginalized in the society. But on the other hand, the media went against Archbishop and they stereotyped the Archbishop. If you go through the book that I have written on young British Muslims, it would give you more in-depth detail. So British media, as we will discuss, as I have discussed on the 9/11 impact in the United States, how the Al Qaeda terrorist attack in the United States has leveled or brushed the Muslims, tarnished the Muslims in one brush as the other, because of the terrorist act of the minority Muslims who were the Al Qaeda terrorist group. Similarly, there was negative impact and stereotype on Muslims in Australia and Britain. They were considered as the other. But in Britain, something else has happened in on July 7th, July 2005, four young people of Al Qaeda terrorist group, Shehzad Tanveer, was one of the members of that Al Qaeda group. And so these four young Al Qaeda terrorists, they bombed the transportations in London. So it was train, bus, the public transports became victims of their acts of terrorism. So what happened then after the 7/7 London bombing, as it is called? There was repercussion against the majority Muslims living in Britain. So There were repercussions. There were Muslims in the schools were singled out. In the public places, they were vilified. Mosques were vandalized. Politicians finger pointed the Muslims and had divisive rhetoric. So this is the Islamophobia that emerged after July 7th. 7th July 2005 London bombing. So people, negative stereotype emerged, but then again it's a minority section of the British society. They became Islamophobic. If you look at the PowerPoints that I have posted in your folder, you will find the diversity of Muslims in Britain. Say, for example, you will find there are different mosques built in Britain. So the East London Mosque is run by the Bengalis, Bangladeshis. The Umar Masjid in Leicester, when I interviewed the young people and I visited that place, it used to be run by the Pakistanis. Then you can see the women wearing a very visible Muslim dress and she was happy to be photographed for my research, and she lived in Cardiff at the time. So we can see the presence of diversity in Britain. So these are the positive aspect of the British society. There are member of parliaments who are Muslims in the British Parliament. The Lord Baroness, they are Muslim. There are Bangladeshi women who are also taking leading part, or they have become politicians in the British Parliament. So there is inclusiveness and diversity in the British society, which is very impressive. As a matter of fact, I would say, like, the Rasgulla I had in East London, the Rasgulla, as we say in Bangla, I think I never had such delicious Rasgulla in Bangladesh, the one that I had in East London. East London is predominantly resided by the South Asians, and particularly the Bangladeshis. So when we speak of the media stereotype, in the interviews I have conducted of Muslim participants, they would give example, like, why if a Christian commits an act of terrorism, why it is not mentioned in the media, or why a Christian terrorist is called a gunman rather than a terrorist, and why a Muslim is always labeled as a terrorist. So why there is so much double standard in the media, why there is so much double standard in the politicians' rhetoric. It's not only based on Britain. They spoke about this. It was in Australia. Some Muslim participants gave me the same example. Like when a Christian commits an act of terrorism, they would say it is domestic violence, or they would say it's an act of a gunman. It's an isolated case. But why would they just finger point at Muslims? If there is an act of terrorism conducted by the Muslim, they would say it's Muslim. It's the religion that teaches terrorism. But when some non-Muslim, they commit an act of terrorism, be it in America or in England or in Australia, why would they say that person has a mental case, or he's mentally ill? So the double standard approach of the media and some politicians in Britain, America, and Australia was discussed or mentioned by the participants of my study. So speaking of this British media, you will find in my chapter, which is based on research that I conducted in 2008, you will find that what I have discuss this in a thematic way. Sometimes the media discussion would label the Muslim as a problematic group. Sometimes they are labeled as the other. Sometimes they, through their headlines and through the content of their reporting, they would make reference to the Quran, and they would say, the Muslim holy book Quran teaches this, and again we have to understand that all the media may not have the same standard when we consider the print media. So there is the tabloid that has news, sensational news, and then there are broadsheet, which is, say, London Times or the Independent or the Guardian, and they would have more international news, and tabloid is more local and more sensational, more sort of so that people buy. It's commercial. Its media is commercial, and tabloids is more commercial because it wants to make money out of its news, I guess. But my finding is that whenever there is a crisis, and say, for example, it is a Muslim question, Muslim issue, all the media would have the same tone. So in the broadsheet print media, what I found is the Guardian and the Independent newspaper, they were more balanced, they were more compassionate, they were more, I think they provided more balanced reporting. But when there was this national crisis, they would have the same voice, targeting the minority group. In the slides, you will see that I provided in your folder, there is the headlines and images, and that was my research was on how the 7/7 London bombing in 2005, in its first anniversary, that is in 2006, how the newspaper represented the news. So what I found is this: after 1 year, when there was this anniversary of the London bombing, all the newspaper had similar tone, had the headlines or had the news in the first page, again it's inducing fear among the people. Look, the Muslims did this, the terrorist act, and so the society is still under threat. The British society is still under threat, and that's the message they have provided in the first and also in the second anniversary of the London bombing. In my research, I have been very critical of this militant Muslims, the Al-Qaeda group, and this terrorist group who committed this horrendous act of terrorism. Say, for example, the 7/7 London bombers, and they have they are responsible for giving the majority Muslims a bad name through their horrendous terrorist act. But when the British society or the British politicians or the British media, they don't see the difference between this militant Muslims, minority Muslims, and the majority peace-loving Muslims, and through their stereotype, they blend all the Muslim as the other in one brush, and that is not helpful for the Muslim minority who have been living in Britain for a long time and serving in Britain helping in develop the British economic infrastructure. And so here comes the inequality and unfairness and with regard to the Muslim minority, and particularly the British media can play it in times of crisis. So in the newspaper slides in PowerPoints, you will see that Shehzad Tanveer from Bradford, he and his team, other three terrorists, Al Qaeda terrorists. They committed this act of terrorism a year ago in 2005, but in 2006, their video was released by the Al Qaeda, and their voices were shown, their pictures were shown, and the video was shown in the TV, and the pictures were in the print media, and now this is again the media inducing fear among the local people in the society. Look, we have this enemy within, so it's the this is how they can stereotype a minority group which is peaceful. Majority of Muslims are peaceful, but then again the newspaper can be very divisive, as I have been mentioning. And with regard to the 7th July London bombing, the victims, there were 52 victims, 52 people were killed, and among the 52 people was a Muslim girl, a young Muslim girl. The media never, what my research, in my research on print media, I just didn't find the media talking about, well, one Muslim girl was also a victim, or the Muslims are also the victim of such terrorism. But the media tone was like, it's the Muslim who are destroying our civil society. So this is that's what my participants have been saying, the double standard of the media in the British society. So as you can see the pictures, it is very clear how the media has leveled or stereotyped the Muslims in the anniversaries of London bombings, first and second anniversary. And I have written this paper, and apart from my book chapter, my colleague Lilia Green and I, we presented and we have written the paper for the conference on this topic, and so you can see her name in the slides. Again, there was another Glasgow bombing in July 2007, I think, and the terror case doctor talked about car bombs. You can see a picture of a person, Daily Mail, 7 July 2007, and he attempted to this person, this terrorist of Indian origin, British Indian origin. He was an engineer, and he attempted attempted to bomb the Glasgow airport. But he was not successful. And you can see the slide, Daily Express, 7th July 2007, page 23, how he was burnt in this in his Glasgow airport attack, how he was burnt, 90% of his body, and eventually he died. But the slide in the newspaper coverage shows, they have shown the image of Osama bin Laden, and then the white British person who was a hero who helped. Well, that's good. He did help. He managed the crisis. But when there is this Muslim news is involved, sometimes I found that there is the headlines or images of terrorism or of any criminal or who is a Muslim, they would just have that report or have that news on the same page, just reminding the audience that the Muslims are a threat, they are the other. So the person who was tried to bomb, who had this terrorist attack on Glasgow bombing, his name was Kafil Ahmed. But with the news of Kafil Ahmed, then there was this other news the Muslims have done on other occasion, terrorism news. They will just have all the news together to induce fear among the readers that, well, these are the groups who are a threat to the British society. The point I'm making is that, of course, unfortunately, there are militants and terrorist groups who are Muslims as well, but the majority of Muslims living in the British society are peaceful people. They're contributing to the British society, but when the media and politicians, they brush them they paint them with one brush as the other, that is not helpful. And speaking of the bright side of the British society, as I said, Muslims have settled well in Britain. They enjoy watching sports, like many participants discussed about the Manu. They have been saying. So I was wondering what Manu is. It's Manchester United. In 2008, it was their most of the participants' favorite team, including Muslim girls, were fan of this sport, and the most participants spoke of Cristiano Ronaldo, who was a player in the Manchester United in 2008. The positive side of the society is many Muslims have settled well in Britain, and there are many mosques, and there have been Eid congregation in the Trafalgar Square, which is the heart of London, and that again, of course, that speaks undoubtedly that Muslims, the recognition of Muslims, and Muslims are enjoying their religious freedom in Britain. Thank you.